friends, welcome back. It seems the only predictable things about this channel are the annual Christmas videos and the annual public domain review videos. Maybe the Star Wars videos. I haven't decided if I'm going to do one of those this year. But anyway, new year, here we are. Let's take a look at what music is entering the public domain this year. And keep in mind, this video is strictly regarding the US of A. Different countries have different rules about when copyright expires. As a matter of fact, I have an update since last video concerning folks north of the border. Used to be copyright in Canada would expire 50 years after the creator's death, but they just changed the rules to be like Europe, so now it's 70 years after creator's death. Canada, I've lost all faith in you. To be fair though, the rule change is not retroactive. It only applies to music that hadn't already become public domain. So if something just entered the public domain in Canada last year, it's still public domain. Down here in the States, though, we do it by time elapsed from first publication. After multiple extensions, it is now 96 years after first publication. Fortunately, the major copyright holding agencies decided not to push for further extensions. So with few exceptions, anything published first in 1928 has entered the public domain this year. So I was going down the list of music first published in 1928, and there are actually a few pieces here by composers such as Handel and Schubert, and I'm kind of skipping over those because that's a gray area. They might have already been public domain before this year. But among pieces that definitely were still under copyright last year, the title that jumped out at me was Sergei Rachmaninoff's Fourth Piano Concerto. Now, this is exciting. This is something that doesn't get played very often, but turns out there's a catch. It's the 1928 version that is now public domain. Chances are, if you've heard this concerto at all, you've heard the 1941 version, so we're going to have to wait a few years yet for that one. Pianists seem to be in disagreement about whether Rachmaninoff's revisions improved the piece or whether he actually got it right the first time and second-guessed himself too much. Basically, for the later version, Rachmaninoff cut a few passages, condensed some others, and rewrote the end of the last movement a bit. But most of the themes are still the same. I'll play you the opening of the first movement, and I'm going to try to approximate the piano and the orchestra simultaneously. And this turns out to be the one singable melody in the entire first movement, to the disappointment of people who are expecting the kind of lush romanticism that you would get from the second concerto or the second symphony, for example. Probably the heart of this concerto is the slow movement, which begins like this. The Rachmaninoff Fourth seems to be the least favorite of the concertos with the general public, but I think it deserves to be heard a lot more than it is. The tone-based piano channel recently released an appreciation of the Rachmaninoff Fourth, which I would highly recommend you go watch. Fun fact, Rachmaninoff dedicated the Fourth Piano Concerto to his fellow Russian expat Nikolai Medtner, and Medtner returned the favor by dedicating his Second Piano Concerto to Rachmaninoff, and the Medtner Second Concerto is also entering the public domain in the US this year. And like the Rachmaninoff Fourth, it deserves to be heard a lot more than it is. Here's the opening of the Medtner Second. And since you got to hear a bit of the slow movement of the Rachmaninoff, here's a bit of the slow movement of the Medtner. Well, that's two heavy Russian concertos in 1 year. What else have we got here? Right, here's an important work. The Rude Poema by Heitor Villa-Lobos. Now there's a great story behind this piece. In 1918, the pianist Arthur Rubinstein was touring Brazil, and some people told him, oh, there's this young upstart composer whose music you should go hear. So Rubinstein did, and he realized, oh, this Villa-Lobos guy has some new and exciting ideas about music. And he went backstage to meet him. Villa-Lobos was initially very prickly and not interested in talking to pianists at all. But his friends prevailed upon him to meet Rubinstein and play him some more music. And the two of them became friends, and Rubinstein became a champion of Villa-Lobos' work. And at Rubinstein's last recital in Rio de Janeiro, he played some of Villa-Lobos' pieces, but they were not very well received by Villa-Lobos' compatriots. However, the composer himself was philosophical and said, I am still too good for them. Well, several years later, Rubinstein is at his apartment in Paris, and Villa-Lobos shows up on his doorstep and says excitedly, I wrote a piano piece just for you. And I have here the second volume of Arthur Rubinstein's memoirs, where he describes the scene. Heitor grabbed his manuscript out of my hands after the big hug I gave him and rushed to the piano to play it for me. It was a very long and very complicated piece of music. The rude of the title did not have the English meaning. In Brazil, it meant savage. When I asked him if he considered me a savage pianist, he said excitedly, we are both savage. We don't care much for pedantic detail. I compose and you play off the heart, making the music live, and this is what I hope I expressed in this work. We read it, playing it in turn with great difficulty, but I did recognize that it was a most original and, in places, a very beautiful work. It certainly made me want to learn it. And Rubinstein did go on to perform it many times in public. I'll just play you the first couple minutes of this. savage enough for you? For me, the real gem from this year's catch of public domain music is Leopold Godowsky's Passacaglia in B minor after Schubert's Unfinished Symphony. Godowsky wrote this for the occasion of the 100th anniversary of Schubert's death, and what he does is he takes the opening 8 measures of Schubert's Unfinished Symphony and spins an entire piece out of them, like this. And Godowsky takes this all kinds of wild and woolly places. Later on, he even makes a reference to Schubert's famous song Erlkönig, which, if you're not familiar with it, has this memorable piano accompaniment. And here's how Godowsky combines that with the Unfinished Symphony. I've barely scratched the surface of what's on this list. We've got lesser-known works by Prokofiev, Stravinsky, Richard Strauss, Karol Szymanowski is here again, Amy Beach is here again, and of course there are always just a whole bunch of names that I've just never heard of at all. So if you have favorites on this list that I haven't mentioned, please let us know what they are. That's it for today, folks. I'll see you all next time. This is Ben, signing off.